Ever wondered how close we are to like the actual end of the world?
Yeah.
Not in like a movie way, but like for real.
Well, it's a question that I think has bothered humans for as long as we've been able to even think about stuff like that.
There's a bunch of scientists out there who have been actually trying to answer that question.
Yeah.
And they use something called the Doomsday Clock.
Yeah, it's the symbolic clock face
Yeah.
where midnight is, total global catastrophe.
Right.
The closer the hand gets to that midnight hour, the more worried these scientists are that we're facing like an existential threat, the end.
Okay, so think of it kind of like a global check engine light, just like flashing urgently to get our attention. And right now, that light is like super red.
Yeah.
The clock right now is at 89 seconds to midnight,
Yeah.
the closest it's ever been.
That's right. It's since it was created in 1947, the Doomsday Clock has just been this like really stark reminder of how, you know, kind of precarious our situation is here on Earth.
So let's unpack this a little bit. First things first, what exactly is this Doomsday Clock? Is it some kind of like a device? Does it like predict the apocalypse?
It's not a prediction device, no.
Wait.
It's more of a symbol
Right.
designed to get people talking and, more importantly, to get people to act, do something.
Right.
And it's maintained by the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists,
Okay.
a group that was formed by some of the scientists that worked on the Manhattan Project.
Whoa, wait. The people who like developed the atomic bomb.
Yeah, they kind of have a unique perspective, I guess you could say, on the potential for like world-ending disasters.
Yeah, I would think so, seeing that firsthand.
Yeah, after they saw how powerful these weapons were,
Right.
they felt this responsibility. Like they had to warn the world about, the dangers of this kind of technology.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So the Doomsday Clock came about from like this really deep concern about, what we as humans are creating.
Right.
But why is it so close to midnight now? What's going on? What's making all the alarm bells go off?
Well, so the Bulletin has this science and security board, right? It's this group of experts, and they look at all these global threats, like, from nuclear war to climate change, biosecurity risks, even AI and like all this crazy technology that's coming out.
Right.
And so in 2025, they move the clock from 90 seconds to 89 seconds to midnight,
Wow.
which is the closest it's ever been, and it's a lot of things all happening at the same time.
Okay, so let's break down these factors then.
Yeah.
What's going on? What's pushing us so close to the edge?
Well, I think the biggest thing right now is nuclear war. The war that's going on in Ukraine and all this tension between Russia and the West.
It's unsettling.
Yeah, it's been decades since we've been this close to like an actual nuclear conflict.
Yeah, you look at the headlines and it's scary.
Yeah.
It feels like we're walking this really tightrope.
Right.
But it sounds like it's more than just nukes, right? There's more to this than just nuclear weapons.
Yeah, climate change is huge. The fact that, globally, countries aren't really doing enough to combat climate change is pushing us towards this, point of no return where we might not be able to fix it.
It's like we're watching this slow motion train wreck, but no one can like pull the brakes.
That's a good way to put it.
We can't forget about COVID either. The pandemic, it showed us how vulnerable we are to like just these biological threats.
Yeah, for sure.
And who knows, maybe even like bioterrorism. It's possible.
Yeah, and it's definitely a real concern.
I mean, it feels like all those like pandemic movies that we used to watch, like suddenly they don't feel so fictional anymore.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Hopefully it doesn't get to that point.
Right.
And then on top of all that, there's this whole thing with disruptive technologies like AI. I
Yeah.
imagine that's a whole other set of issues that could lead to like, the end of the world kind of scenarios.
AI could be a game changer, It could solve a lot of problems.
Right.
But it comes with some serious risks, too. Especially when you think about, like, misinformation, fake news, that sort of thing. And what about autonomous weapons? Machines making decisions about war.
It's like a double-edged sword.
Exactly.
It could be great,
Yeah,
but it could also be really, really bad.
totally. And that's why the Doomsday Clock takes all these new technologies into account.
Right.
It's a good reminder that we need to be really careful about how we develop and use these, really powerful tools.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to maybe move on to our next topic,
Okay.
if that's all right with you.
Yeah, sure.
Because all this talk about, potential doom and gloom, it's a little heavy. So I'm wondering, what can we actually do about all this?
Yeah, good question. I mean, it can be kind of overwhelming, right? When you see all these threats kind of like hanging over us.
Yeah, it's definitely enough to make you want to like hide under a blanket. But I'm hoping
Mm-hmm.
that the scientists, with this doomsday clock, They're not just trying to scare us.
Right.
They must have some ideas about, like, how to actually turn things around.
Of course, yeah. They really stress that even though things look really bad, it's not like a lost cause.
Hmm.
There are things we can do, both as individuals and like as a whole planet to actually like deal with these threats.
Okay, that's good to hear. But when we're talking about, like, global threats and doomsday scenarios, it's hard not to feel like, what I do as one person doesn't really matter. It's just like a drop in the bucket. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get that.
So what can we actually do to actually make a difference? Like, what are some things that people can do in their everyday lives?
I think one of the easiest places to start is like reducing your carbon footprint.
Yeah.
Like think about how you get around. Can you walk more, bike more, carpool, take public transport, those kind of things.
I've actually been trying to bike to work a couple times a week. It's good exercise. Plus, I feel a little less guilty about, like, my weekend road trips.
Right, exactly. And even like around the house, switching to like energy efficient appliances and, even silly stuff like turning off the lights when you leave a room. All that stuff adds up.
I'm so bad at it. I leave lights on all the time. It's like a bad habit.
It's the little things.
Yeah, so it's not just like in our homes, though, right?
Right.
Like, what about the choices that we make, like, as consumers? Does that matter?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Reduce, reuse, recycle.
Yeah.
We've all heard that a million times, but it's true.
Right.
And like, think about where you're spending your money, you know, support companies that actually care about sustainability and doing things the right way.
So it's kind of like voting with our dollars in a way.
Yeah, exactly.
Choosing companies that, like, align with our values.
And speaking of voting, political action is really important too.
You mean like actually going out and voting in elections?
Yeah, of course. But it's also about like letting your representatives know how you feel, like making it clear that these issues matter to you, that you want them to prioritize things like, climate action or nuclear nonproliferation.
So, like, writing to our senators and representatives, going to those town hall meetings.
Yeah, and you can also support organizations that are, actually doing the work on the ground.
Like the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists.
Yeah, them, but also just like all sorts of local and global groups that are fighting for, peace and sustainability and a better future. You can volunteer, you can donate, or even just like spread the word about the work they're doing, tell your friends.
So we've talked about individual actions, political engagement, and supporting these organizations that are out there doing good work.
Right.
But I think even with all that, it's still really easy to just feel totally overwhelmed. Like, what can we do to, I don't know, move beyond that feeling of helplessness and actually start to believe that we can change things?
Yeah, it's a good point. I think that it's about like shifting our perspective, instead of focusing on how huge these problems are, like just how massive they are, focus on the fact that like we actually have the power to change things, when millions of people start making different choices, when we all come together and start working towards the same goal, it creates this wave that's hard to ignore.
It's about finding your people.
Yeah.
Like finding other people who care about this stuff.
Right.
And then all working together.
Exactly. And it's not just about what you do, it's about how you do it, like come at it with creativity and optimism and like a sense of working together, not against each other.
Yeah. It's a good reminder. It's easy to get lost in like all the doom and gloom, but we have to, I don't know, you have to keep that sense of hope alive if we're going to make any progress.
Totally.
And I'm sure there are people out there who, they hear about this doomsday clock and they just think it's all like fear mongering, like it's all hype and there's no real substance to it.
I get that. I mean, yeah, fear can be paralyzing, but it can also be motivating.
Right.
Like it can get us to actually do something. The trick is to turn that fear into something positive, something that actually makes a difference.
Right. So turn that anxiety into action.
Exactly.
But we've been talking about individual action a lot.
Yeah.
What about the bigger picture? Like what kind of systemic changes need to happen, on a societal level if we really want to avoid this whole doomsday scenario?
That's where things get really interesting, I think.
Right.
Because to create real change, lasting change, we have to go after the root causes of these problems.
Okay.
And that means like a fundamental shift in how we think, We have to stop thinking only about the short term and like what's good for just me.
Right.
You have to start thinking about the long term and about how everything's connected.
So it's like we have to stop kicking the can down the road.
Yeah.
And start thinking about the world that we're leaving behind.
Exactly. We need to move beyond this like us versus them mentality.
Yeah.
and start working together to solve these problems.
That sounds great in theory, but like, how do we actually get there? I mean, it seems so daunting.
It starts by recognizing that, like, the way we do things now, it's just not working. We have to rethink our economic models, our political structures, even our cultural narratives, you know? Like, we have to start prioritizing cooperation instead of competition,
Right.
sustainability over profits,
Right.
and empathy over indifference.
So it's like a total paradigm shift, like how we see the world.
Yeah, exactly. It's about like reimagining what's possible and building systems that actually work for everyone, not just a select few.
Yeah, it's starting to seem like the solutions to these big, huge problems, they're not going to come from like, some big leader telling us what to do or some fancy technology that just fixes everything.
Right.
It's going to take a much deeper change, like a change in our values, our priorities as a society.
You're getting it. It's a process. It's going to take time,
Right.
but it's a journey that we have to take if we want humanity to have a future, you know?
So there's this recurring theme that I'm hearing.
Yeah.
It's like collective action,
Yeah.
individual responsibility,
Right.
and like a totally different way of looking at our relationship with the world.
That's it?
Okay, so let's bring it back to the Doomsday Clock for a second.
Okay.
We've talked about its history,
Yeah.
what it symbolizes, people who criticize it.
Right.
But what about the future of the clock? Is it going to still be a thing, in the years to come?
That's actually been a big debate, even within the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists.
Oh, really?
Yeah, some people think the clock has run its course.
Okay.
Like, it's lost its power, and we need to find a new way to get people's attention.
So, like, maybe it's time to retire the clock.
Yeah, but then some people say, no, it's more important now than ever that, like, the clock, it's so simple and stark, you know?
Right.
It really gets people thinking about what's at stake.
Right. It all comes down to whether people still, like, get the message.
Exactly.
But even if the clock stays, like, the threats are changing all the time. How do they keep up with that? How do they make sure the clock is still relevant?
That's a big challenge. I mean, when the Doomsday Clock was first created, it was like the Cold War, right? The biggest fear was like nuclear war. That's it.
Right.
But now it's like so much more complicated. It's climate change, it's pandemics, it's cyber warfare, it's AI, it's everything all at once.
It's not just about moving that minute hand closer to midnight or further away.
Exactly.
It's about like rethinking the whole idea of the clock.
Yeah, and they're actually doing that. The Bulletin, they're always trying to figure out how to make the clock more relevant, how to use it to explain these really complex issues.
Like they're trying to build a better doomsday clock.
Yeah, in a way they are. They know that things are changing, and they know the clock has to change with it.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting to think about, like how this symbolic clock can actually adapt and change over time.
Yeah.
It's like a reminder that this whole idea of trying to protect the future, it's never really over.
It's an ongoing process.
Right.
You always got to be paying attention, trying new things, adapting to the changes.
That's a great point, and it kind of leads us perfectly into what I want to talk about next.
Okay.
We've been focusing a lot on these external threats,
Yeah.
like nuclear war, climate change, AI and all that.
Right.
But what about the threats that come from inside, Like,
Yeah.
what about us? What about the human element?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Let's talk about that in our final segment.
All right.
We've talked a lot about these big threats, like nuclear war and climate change, the kind of stuff that really makes you think. But what about the threats that come from, like, inside, the human element,
Yeah, that's important. You could say that the biggest threats to humanity aren't actually things like asteroids or volcanoes, but ourselves,
Whoa, that's kind of deep.
Yeah.
So we're not just fighting the clock, but we're also fighting our own, like, self-destructive urges.
Exactly. And I think one of the biggest problems is our like short-term thinking, We want everything right now. And that makes it hard to deal with big problems like climate change where we don't see the effects right away.
It's like we're stuck in this buy now, pay later mindset, but like for the whole planet.
Yeah, and that short-term thinking gets even worse when you add in our tendency to like form tribes.
Right.
We divide ourselves up based on, country, beliefs, even like what sports teams we like.
It's that whole us versus them thing.
Exactly. And it makes it so hard to work together on these big problems that need everyone on board.
Right. Like everyone's just stuck in their own little bubble, listening to the same stuff and just getting more and more convinced that they're right and everyone else is wrong.
And social media doesn't help.
No, I was just going to say, it feels like social media has made that so much worse.
It really has. It can connect people, sure, but it also isolates us. And it's so easy to spread misinformation and just make people more divided.
So we're divided and misinformed. That's not a good combo.
Not at all.
And then on top of all that, there's just this like feeling of apathy, you know?
Right. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by all these problems. Like, what can one person do? Right.
Yeah.
So people just tune out. They figure nothing they do matters.
I'll be honest, I've felt that way too. Sometimes it's like, what's the point?
Hmm.
But if our own, like, short-sightedness and our tribalism and our apathy, if that's what's pushing us closer to the edge, what can we do to break out of that?
It's tough, but I think the first step is to become more aware of our own biases, like the ways that we think that shape how we see the world.
So, like, really look at ourselves, do some soul searching.
Exactly. It's about questioning our assumptions, being open to new ideas, and really listening to people who see things differently than we do.
That's tough, but it sounds important.
It is, and we also need to build more empathy, like actually try to understand how other people feel, even if we don't agree with them.
Right, like, walk a mile in their shoes.
But how do you do that on a global scale, right?
Yeah, it seems kind of impossible.
Well, it starts with remembering that we're all human. We might come from different places and believe different things, but we all want the same basic things like safety, security.
We all want a good life.
Right, and that empathy needs to go beyond just the people we know. It needs to include everyone, even future generations. We have to start thinking about the world we're leaving behind for our kids and grandkids.
So it's about, like, expanding our circle of caring, right? To include more than just ourselves and the people we know right now.
Yeah, but let's be real. Even if we get over all that, even if we're thinking long term and being empathetic and all that, we're still facing some huge problems. How do we stay motivated when it seems like the odds are stacked against us?
That's a good question.
I think it comes down to hope.
Okay.
We have to believe that things can get better, that we can actually make a difference.
Hope is pretty powerful.
It really is, and it's contagious. Like when we believe in a better future, when we take action, it inspires other people to do the same, and it creates this ripple effect of positive change.
So we need awareness, empathy, and hope. Those are the keys to a brighter future.
I think so. Those are the things that can counteract our own, self-destructive tendencies.
We've covered a lot today, the doomsday clock, the threats we're facing, and most importantly, what we can do about it. So, like, what are the big takeaways here? What do we want people to remember?
I think the biggest thing is that the future isn't decided yet. We have choices. The doomsday clock isn't a prediction. It's a warning. It's a reminder that we have to work together.
And that even small actions, when enough people do them, can make a huge difference.
Exactly. So let's choose hope over despair. Let's take action instead of giving up. And let's work together to build a future where we don't just survive, but where we actually thrive.
I love that. That's a great note to end on. And that's all the time we have for this deep dive. We hope you found it informative and maybe even a little inspiring. And remember, the future is ours to create. Let's make it a good one.